Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. Recently we did a demo review of Audient ASP880 set of 8 preamps. Today we're going to be talking about the other piece of equipment that is in that lineup, which is the ASP880. And this is the higher end, more premium spec set of 8 preamps in a box. So there's a lot to talk about. So if you didn't watch the previous video, then I'll talk briefly about what you would use this for. If you've got an interface that's only got a limited number of channels but has an ADAT input, then you can expand that by adding more channels, and this is the way that you would generally do it. So if you've got something like an Audient ID22 or something like one of the larger Focusrite interfaces or any of those kind of brands that have got, I don't know, either 2 or 4 or 8 channels of microphone inputs, but then they've got the ADAT inputs, what you can do is you can get something like the 880 and you can run the ADAT output into that interface, and that suddenly expands that and uses all the microphone preamps that are in this unit to make that whole thing appear to the computer as something bigger. So you've got more to play with without having to go and buy one of these ridiculous big units. You can have several pieces and you can add them in, take them out at will. Now, this set of microphone preamps is incredibly clear and transparent. The aim with the 880 is to have pristine channels on each one. So there are no super channels on this one, there are just 8 almost identical high quality channels. The only difference with the first 2 channels is they have a DI input. That's the only difference as far as I can see. And the 2 super channels, quote unquote, have got a pad as well. The other 6 haven't, and hopefully that's just because you don't need them. I would imagine then that those 6 other preamps have a greater dynamic range. Now, there are loads of buttons and switches and knobs on the 880, so let's talk about what they are in turn. So 48 volts is fairly obvious, that's phantom power. It is nice that it's a separate phantom power for each channel, so you're not going to get like banks of 4 or banks of 8 for global phantom power, where you might end up sending phantom power to a ribbon when you meant to send it to a condenser. It's not going to happen with this. Then you've got, well, the preamp gain is exactly what it says. Each channel has a polarity reverse or phase reverse button, which is quite useful in a studio. That in hardware, I can flip the phase on any channel at the touch of a button, which is more useful than it sounds. I mean, yes, you can do it in software, but being able to do it once, do it permanently on this side, means you're not having to mess around in your mixing, checking all your phase. If you're doing it right on the way in, you should be listening for phase issues before you even hit the record button. So this is a good way to fix that. And then when you come to mixing later, it's just done. And the next thing that's on the list is every channel's got a high pass filter, but instead of the usual stock, 100 Hz high pass filter that's a button or whatever that may be, this is a variable high pass filter, which is really quite useful and something that I'll probably be using a lot. Again, making mixing easier. The variable shelf high pass filter even goes from 25 Hz all the way up to 250. So I don't usually scoop all the low end out in tracking because it's difficult to get back, but I can definitely see myself using this on a vocal, maybe, I don't know, somewhere between 80 and 120 Hz just to get rid of the low end rumble but keep all the character. Depending on the voice, it'd be nice to have that control. And for even things like kick drum and bass, it would be nice to have a high pass filter on, I don't know, 30, 40 hertz, just so that the headroom on the files isn't eaten up by this subsonic information that we're never going to hear. I mean, if I'm recording, say, a metal drummer and his feet are going ha, I could take the inner kick mic and take away with this filter everything below, I don't know, 60 hertz, 70 hertz. And with the sub kick on the outside, I could take everything out below 40 hertz. And suddenly the entire kit will start to sound more focused before we've even looked at mixing. I think that's a great little feature. I've not seen that on any other piece of equipment, even near this price range. I've seen a few discrete preamps have variable high-pass filters, but even then it's not that common. The next thing to talk about is the little switch next to the gain, which is variable impedance. Now this is a very interesting little control that this won't do much if you're using condensers, but this really will affect dynamic mics and ribbon mics. Back in the day, in the 50s and 60s, before a standard was set, microphones generally were made to be, I think it's 600 ohms, and the interface was made to be 600 ohms as well. That way they were impedance matched, which is very rare now because it can give you quite a dull sound and it can affect things over lengths of cables, and it can give you a much less bright, harsh tone, which can be useful. Say if you've got room mics on a drum kit and you don't want some of the kind of ringy high end in there, you can knock the impedance down on the mics and give it a much more soft sound. You could also use it in front of a guitar cab if you've got a particular dynamic microphone that's almost right but just has a bit of a high pitch resonance. Try changing the impedance, see if that softens things off, because quite often what happens when you've got a very high impedance microphone preamp and a low impedance microphone is the high impedance of the mic preamp can make for these subtle little kind of almost harsh ringing sounds. It doesn't happen all the time, depends on the source, but it's a nice tool to have to potentially fix issues in hardware, because there is no way in the computer that I'm aware of in terms of mixing in the box to change the impedance and sound of a microphone, because that's a very dynamic reaction between the mic and the preamp, and it's an electrical change, so it's something that you're either going to get right first time or you're not going to think about later. So it's a nice little thing to have. Now the real trick for me up the sleeve of the ASP880 is the last button on each channel, which is the blue one that says AD. Now the AD, what that does is that switches where the analog to digital converter chip is getting its information from. Because the way that this works is that the microphone signal comes in to the mic preamp, and then it's sent out through a D-sub with all the line outputs. And if the AD switch is out, it's also sent to the analog to digital converter, so you can use these preamps straight out to line level if you've got different converters, or if you've got hardware you want to use. That's the thing, there's another D-sub on the 880 that isn't there on the 800, which is the returns. So what you can do is you can have things like hardware compressors or hardware EQs or whatever it is that you would like to use in hardware, and because your microphone preamp is sending the line output already, no matter what happens, come rain, come shine, then you can go out to your saturation boxes or whatever it is that you have and then come back in, and then if you click the AD button, that then makes that an insert loop and the converter takes the input from the returns. The other way that you might use this, and the way that I'm thinking about using this, is because the converters, the audio converters in this are really top notch, you can have vintage analog preamps, real hardware single channel discrete preamps, and then send the line output from them into the converters on the 880. Does kind of make the whole microphone preamp ultra modern fast neutral thing slightly redundant, but the fact that it's on a switch means that you can on any given day decide whether you want that ultra modern clean or click the button in and use your vintage preamps for that saturation. And the choice is there without you having to go round the back and do rerouting or change your patch bay setup or anything. It's just one click of a button and off you go. I am intending to use this. It's going to take me a little while to get D-sub to XLR or D-sub to whatever cables, but I have these vintage BBC line preamps which I've had to use with less than stellar quality mic preamps before, but they have loads of transformers and all that kind of circuitry, and they add a certain something which I've never found anywhere else, including I've got two of these preamps that have got really quite rare inductor-based EQs, and I'd really like to use them. So if I can get those on the D-subs in insert points, I can then decide on a flick of a switch whether I want that vintage tone or whether I want ultra fast, ultra modern, ultra low noise signals, because depending on what application I'm doing, I might need that ultra clear low noise thing. Or with these vintage preamps that I've got, they do have quite a bit of background noise, but if I'm doing, say, a heavy rock production and I just want the character, doesn't matter, fine. And having that option is really opening my perceptions of what I can do, because as time's gone on, I've moved away from using hardware quite a lot because of the flexibility of working in the box, but being given the option on the flick of a switch here is drawing me back to analog. And at this price point, I mean, how much are these? £750, £800, the ASP880, so it's not cheap. You're talking nearly £100 per channel, although that does include your analog to digital converter, that includes a variable impedance preamp. That's not bad value for money for what this does with the options it gives me. This really is kind of the modern Swiss Army knife in terms of either getting the super modern sound or letting me use my vintage gear once again. So there's every chance that when this review is over, I might not be sending this back to Audient. I might just be going, shut up and take my money, and keeping hold of this. And we'll see how it fares. That's how it's looking right now, and that's probably how it's going to be. So Okay, so this is now the ASP880. It's interesting, the gain isn't quite as much as it was in the 800. I can hear it in the headphones, it's not quite as loud. But that noise floor has just gone. So now I'm going to level match this with the 800 and just do a quick clip of the clean 800 back to back here. Might sound a little weird. Clean gain on this preamp. This is the ASP800 with the HMS and iron turned off. And this is the 880 again. And this is on the high impedance setting. So that's what I'm going to show you now, is this is the high impedance, and with a dynamic mic, this will make quite the difference. So I'm going to change this to the medium impedance, then the low impedance. This is the high impedance right now. It's above 2 kilo ohms, I think. So down to the medium. Okay, so this is the same mic, but with the medium impedance instead of the high impedance. And you can probably hear how the high end on this has suddenly become a little more soft. That it's reacting differently with the preamp. Now let's move it straight over to the low impedance and you'll hear the difference. Okay, so now we're on the low impedance and I'm really having to get quite close to the mic to get a similar kind of level out of it. That's partly because of the way that kind of impedance matching works. It's something that makes my head boil, but something that was done a lot in the 50s and 60s that they changed their way of thinking. But this is now kind of a very vintage setup. So this is low impedance preamp, pretty much matching with a high, like 600 ohms high impedance dynamic mic. Thanks for watching, guys. I hope you found this useful. This has certainly been an interesting one for me to have the Audient gear in. Hit the like button if you found this great. Hit the subscribe button because that really helps as we're growing as time goes on. And stick around and I'll see you in the next video.